Hello, I'm Ronnie Eldridge. Welcome to Eldridge and Company. I'll always remember the night I sat next to Lynn Sherr in a television studio and reported the day's election results. It was a one-time dream for me, but for Lynn it was just an early day in her wonderful career as a television reporter and correspondent. Do you remember that night?
76. Yeah,
yes.
Sure.
Yeah, it was great. And
yeah.
I had
Public
so much
television.
Fun. Right, Channel 13.
Indeed, indeed.
And I went out and bought a new Blue Blast. That's all I remember.
But that's important. See, the thing people don't realize about television is it really does matter what you're wearing.
Yeah, well, now I'm a little black. You're in red, so I can tell the difference. It's true, right?
You know, there's two things. One is what you wear. Three things. One is what you wear. Two is your hair, and your hair is great. Your hair is always great. And the third is you want to make sure you don't have bags under your eyes.
But I have bags, but then I just put this up.
So who can tell the difference? Right?
There was a story about the dogs and the dog show and what they do.
I read that. I loved it. Well, I'm totally into the dog show. I don't own a dog. I used to as a kid.
They color them and
it's great. Poofs, hair dryer, gel, hairspray.
Right. That's great.
I have to tell you now, I don't want to insult anybody, but I think the handlers could use a little work too.
They're a little dowdy. Yes.
Yeah.
So those days were very early in your career, but I started much earlier than you. I'm considerably older than you. Since I've told everybody my age, I don't want them to think you're my age.
And you just had a birthday.
75 years old.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. So you've seen an enormous change in television because I remember, I mean, you were really one of the first of women to really break it. I mean, when I worked at CBS, which was my first job after college, Pauline Fredericks was at the UN, and that, I think, her career happened by an error, or it was a crisis. They didn't have anybody else to send, so they sent her. So tell me about the early days in television for women.
Well, it was, I don't want to tell you it was tough, and we really had to break down all the barriers. We did. But it was also a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And
did you start at CBS?
My first television job was Channel 2. Yeah, Channel 2 in New York.
And what made you decide you wanted to do that?
I didn't. I was working at the Associated Press. I was perfectly happy being a print reporter, loved what I did. I had a great job. I was traveling all over the country, sometimes around the world. I had my own byline, and as you know, how the AP works is you do your story, and then it gets printed in a zillion newspapers with luck.
It's a great news service.
Oh, it's wonderful. And we were a feature department, and so I got to do all sorts of cool stuff. And I did a story. I got an exclusive one day with somebody, and there was a little write-up about me in the AP House Organ, and somebody from CBS saw it, and they asked me to be a writer. Now, you know, part of the reason I tell the story is this way, is there was a picture of me in the AP log. Okay, so yes, they wanted a writer, but television being television, they were happy that it was a blonde writer, right? So anyway, I didn't take that job because I didn't want to write for television. I preferred seeing my own byline. But a couple of months later, they asked me to come and try out to be a correspondent, and I did that. And I just thought it was time for a change. This was 1972, and I thought, I had always disdained television. I didn't want to be one of those, but television was not so important in those days. It was just starting to get important.
When I went to work at CBS, we didn't even have a television set. And I would ride in the elevator with Douglas Edwards. All I wanted was to work in the news department. I could never get a job in the news department. I didn't even know it was Doug Edwards. He used to do the 7 o'clock network news until we got the television set finally.
Well, it was a different time. And when I got to Channel 2, there were one or two other women there. I was not the first woman. I was replacing another woman, Pia Lindstrom, and who has a very distinguished career and remains a good friend. And it was... oh dear, how shall I describe it? I can't say there was sex discrimination in terms of stories I got, and because I also came in as the house feminist. You know, they knew that I had a history of doing a lot of stuff about women's issues, and so I covered a lot of those stories. And I've recently been going through all of my old material for a book that I'm doing. And do you know, I was at Channel 2 for 2 years. Do you know that I did 2 stories, count them, 2, on February 15th, Susan B. Anthony's birthday. And Susan B. Anthony, as you know, is my hero, the leader of the suffrage movement, one of the leaders of the suffrage movement. I've done a book about her, indeed. But I just had to laugh when I saw my notes from that I actually pulled off 2 stories which were, I mean, New York in 1972, you know, it was a bunch of women standing on the steps of City Hall singing "Happy Birthday" to Susan B. Anthony. It was so stupid. But
who were the women?
I covered
It must have been NOW or something.
Probably
NOW was an active group then.
Probably the National Organization for Women,
Right.
the chapter in New York, which was a very active chapter.
Right.
And how did I get those stories on the air? Who knows? But I did. So this is by way of saying it wasn't all terrible. However, it was a time when there were no women in upper management. You had no one to go to. When looks mattered maybe more than as much as today. I don't know what the answer is. They've always mattered. They always matter in television for men as well, so that's a separate thing. So every day there was not an issue, but every now and then you would run into something.
They always talk about, they used to talk about the content of shows. I mean, other than news, of how many women were the leads in a drama, or what the women have in the roles they play in the sitcoms. And then, of course, in the management of the newsroom, how many people really made the assignments and decided what news was going to be.
We had nobody in upper management, and that's a huge change for today. And, again, it was a handful of women on the air. It was never a lot. It was never equal the way it is now, or some cases there are more women than men. But the big issue to me was management. I knew that once we started getting on the air, they were not going to keep us off the air. Because, what the argument was against having women on the air was that our voices were too high and we had no authority. Okay, we've at least disproved one of those things.
And if they weren't high, well, they always said they were shrill. I remember once writing a piece about Bella when they called her shrill, right?
Right. All the words that would be used for men were aggressive, the words for men were ambitious, career conscious, dedicated. The words for women were shrill, aggressive, doesn't want to stay in the house, wants to be out in the world. So, there was subtle and not so subtle stuff going on.
But you were really interested in the women's movement and feminism all along.
Well, I got interested in the women's movement when I was at the Associated Press. It was 1969. The Women's Liberation movement, in fact, Women's Liberation Front is what it first got called, was just getting started, and I was assigned to cover it because those were the days they wouldn't let men in. So for once, as a woman, you had an edge. For me, it was the revelation that they were not just talking about themselves, that maybe they were talking about me too. It never occurred to me that I was a feminist. It never occurred to me there was anything called sex discrimination. I never thought I had seen it.
How did you even get a job at AP?
I got a job at AP. AP was actually reasonably good about hiring women, and I got I started as a real underling, and I just kind of worked my way up.
And you decided you wanted to be a reporter or
from the beginning? Brenda Starr. Brenda Starr. Yeah.
That was a comic strip, right?
Yes. You have to remind the viewers, right? Brenda Starr is a now defunct comic strip, alas. But she was gorgeous. She was very talented. She always got her story and she always got her man. And I thought that was exactly the role model that I wanted. She had a very adventurous life. But more than that, I just love telling people stories. I like being the first one there. I like being the one to explain it to you. I feel as if I know how to explain something better than other people. And that's the kind of thing I like doing.
Do you think television has changed in the content and the way now people use television to get their news? Right. That's had an impact on our lives, right?
Yeah, television has changed. Television is changing. It has changed the way we view the world. Certainly when I started out, television was not the primary source for people getting the news. Over time, local news did become the primary source. And then, of course, everybody would be home to watch the 7 o'clock evening news. Now, in college, actually, as I recall, the 7 o'clock news was pretty important in my life, which means, mid-60s. But boy, did that change, It became the dominant thing, the totally dominant thing when there were 3 networks. And what you did was everybody was home at 7 o'clock and you watched the news.
And I think that was all over. Now you travel. I mean, first of all, they were 6:30 here, 6 o'clock someplace else, 5:30
Well, they moved us back.
It's all the role of a network, too.
They moved us back because the local stations wanted that half hour to make more money. You can make more money by putting Jeopardy on at 7 o'clock than you can by running the evening news. So nobody involved at network liked it much, but we did it.
Did you think in the early days you were more able to express personal opinions about the news?
On the air?
Yeah.
No. Au contraire, I think it's exactly the opposite. I think in the beginning, when I started, let's take local out of the picture for a minute. Let's go to the network, because I started my first network job. Well, I was at PBS and then at ABC. I think it was very clear to me that the mandate was you tell the story, not with your point of view. I've always said I don't think anybody can be objective, but you can be fair. You can definitely be fair, and that's, to me, the most important thing.
Especially if you're explaining something
Absolutely.
that happened. Right.
It doesn't mean you have to do what I've always called the delicatessen school of journalism, a quarter pound of this, a quarter pound of that. You don't have to do that. You do have to be fair, and I think you can absolutely have your own point of view, but be fair on the air when you cover a story. So I grew up believing that that's what journalism was, and I think it's changed. I think that audiences want more of an edge. I think we're giving more of an edge. I'm not sure it's a great idea, but it's out there.
It used to be labeled, though, as commentary. You know, when I worked at CBS, it was the Murrow days, so I'm interested, you know, good night and good luck.
Right.
I mean, it's such a revelation to so many people, and to me, that's the way the world should be, and I'm always surprised it isn't that way. So you have Andy Rooney, who does a commentary.
Right.
Now I'm not talking cable, and that's, of course, the major change, isn't it?
Yeah,
the networks have still stayed.
There's nobody that I can think of, except for Andy on 60 Minutes, who does what's labeled commentary. Yeah. There are people who it should be labeled commentary, and no, I'm not going to say who I'm talking about. There are people who should have that every time they make a comment, and they don't. I think there's been an unfortunate morphing the other way. Yeah. And, you know, I've always said, we're such a public-driven medium. If you don't like what we're doing, change the channel. I used to do this. No one does that anymore. You just do that now. Change the channel. And they've started doing that, but I think they're doing it the wrong way. I think there's much more inclination to go towards opinion. And it's interesting.
And it's a problem then with the cable. I mean, there's so many more viewers now on cable. But instead of...
Well, there are more viewers on cable than there were. There are not more viewers on cable than on the networks.
Right. But it seems to me that once a show starts, like American Idol, then everybody's going to copy it.
But come on, Ronnie, that's always been the case. You had a sitcom that worked, there was another one that was the exact clone.
Same thing.
So copying a successful format is not new. What is amazing to me, though, is that remember when cable first started, and the lure of cable was all these different channels, something for everyone, and instead there's a lot of the same going
so you go
across.
from one to the other.
Yeah.
Conventions, because I have always loved the best. But that's
not
changed also, and that's terrible. I mean, politics has definitely been affected by television.
Right.
But television has also been perverted by the politics. I mean, the parties have gotten so cynical, too.
I think you have to, when you say conventions have changed and that's terrible, I think you have to realize where we are. You know, times change. We're allowed to. Okay, first of all, 1968 were the last...
I was part of that. I mean, after 68 were the McGovern changes.
Exactly.
We changed it.
You changed
it. And we ruined it.
You changed it so that in 72 it was a front-loaded, it was a primary system, right?
Right.
So all of a sudden you don't need the conventions anymore. So for a couple of convention years, we dutifully covered them, and we would all stand there and say, there's not much going on the floor here. I remember the last floor fight I think I covered was 76, Teddy Kennedy, Senator Kennedy, making a run for the nomination against Jimmy Carter. Right. And I remember distinctly interviewing Barbara Mikulski, now the senator from Maryland, William Wimpesinger, the head of the Machinist Union, who all said they were going to, she said she was going to nominate Kennedy no matter what. And this is when Jimmy Carter had the nomination sewed up. Yeah. And Wimpesinger said he was going to walk out. Well, I can't remember if he walked out. And, and Teddy Kennedy said, hey, I'm withdrawing. You know,
I remember one other fight which really never came, but everybody tried to make it a fight, was the father Bush, who they had abortions. The women there waged a platform fight, but nowadays they don't even do the platform.
No, there's not. So what my point is, we shouldn't be covering them because they're just PR events now.
Absolutely.
Again, is it terrible? I don't know.
Well, I think the change in politics is bad.
Well, fine, but there's now a front-loaded primary system. So we've done away with the party bosses deciding. We've done away with decisions being made on the floor. So there's no reason to cover it, but we do cover the primaries like crazy. Yeah. So it's changed, you know.
It's just, but you also make it so crazy for somebody to be a candidate that I can't, you know, I mean, we're already in a narrow field of who's interested in being president. Somebody who has to put up with all this abuse and
to be able to raise a lot of money.
Yes.
I mean, isn't money really the biggest difference in politics at this point?
Right, and the ability to buy the television time.
Right. Well, there you are.
Right.
Are you one of these people who believes that TV time ought to be free?
I think for candidates there should be, yes, but I don't exactly know how you do that.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, in England, where they have the short times, they have the same thing. They're selling commercials, aren't they? And they do that even in a short campaign.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the answer is, but I think there has to be a change in the way we do nominate presidential candidates. I just think this is crazy.
Well, I'll tell you the one change that I would like to see.
Yeah.
I think voting ought to be mandatory.
Yeah.
I think there ought to be a fine if you don't vote.
That's a very good thing, but how?
Well, they do it. Don't they do it in Australia? Isn't there a fine if you don't vote?
I think so, but I don't think incumbents really want you to bring more people in to vote. You know, it's all become such. You can't figure out who's the captive of whom anymore.
Right. It's I just our voting percentages are not as bad as everyone says they are, but they're bad. They're not great, and I really do think it should be an obligation of living in a democracy.
And these front-loaded primaries, when you talk about it, Iowa and New Hampshire, these are not typical states. And they don't really typify the problems that the country faces, and yet they have a very strong role in determining who's
So change the primary system back if everybody thinks. All I'm saying is, I think in terms of television coverage, I think that I think we're doing what we have to do.
Yeah.
And I don't think, I know everyone says, oh, it's a quadrennial town meeting, it's a civics lesson, you got to see it. Well, I'm not sure that's right. I think it was a civics lesson, and now I think it's a PR lesson. Right. And I'm not sure the American public really needs to sit down for that.
No, and you're really being taken terrible advantage of because it's nonsense. Yeah. What was the most exciting thing you ever covered in television?
Oh, I think the space program. I loved the space program. It was until it went sour. And
were you there when?
No, when Challenger exploded, the first shuttle that we lost, I and what my husband used to refer to as the whole A-team of space coverage was in California, because there was, from the Jet Propulsion Labs, there was an unmanned, I hate the word unmanned, an unpersoned voyage going to the planet Uranus. Oh. It was a flyby, and you'll remember those gorgeous photographs that came back. Yeah. First ever, and it was the 25th mission of the shuttle, and we all felt, fine, we're covered, but we think this other one is more exciting to watch. So off we went.
You were quoted some places saying that you had difficulty in trying to say to people at the network, at least I think you were, that a shuttle launch
was dangerous.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, a shuttle astronaut, the shuttle astronauts are sitting in that in the spacecraft on 500,000 tons of volatile fuel that could go off at any time the wrong way, and it's a dangerous bird. It wasn't a 747. And I kept trying to make that point to no avail. And so we got left high and dry on Challenger at ABC. I mean, we had a correspondent and no crew. We had no ability, we had no lines out. So we had no way to cover that live. So they had to take the NASA feed at first. And then what happened is Peter Jennings was in Washington with all the other anchors for the State of the Union address. And he went right to the Washington Bureau, and I went to the LA Bureau, and I was just on the air all day from LA. And at that point, it didn't matter where you were, because NASA was saying nothing. So if I'd been on the scene, I wouldn't have done any better. And I worked the phones all day and was able to contribute whatever I could contribute. But and then after that, I covered the Rogers Commission hearings, and then after that, I left space and went to 2020. But God, covering the space program while it was working was spectacular.
And what about these recent pictures that came back? It's incredible, isn't it?
I think it's extraordinary. I'm one of these people who believes we should be in space, and I know it's expensive, and no, I don't believe it should be to the exclusion of educating our youngsters, but I think we're a society that can afford to do both. And I think certainly President Kennedy got us on the right track, or go back, it was Eisenhower who created NASA. And I think I think as human beings, we have to have something to
hear
reach
you
for.
Say this. Yeah.
Oh, I'm a space nut. I mean, I don't like a lot of the things I see, but do I think we belong there? Absolutely. Absolutely.
So interesting.
You're not used to hearing people say that.
No,
most people
they don't.
Well,
you know,
most of your friends would probably
we
say,
don't even
"Don't
talk
spend
about
the money."
it. No, no, don't disparage my friends.
I consider myself your friend.
I got excited. Thank you. I got excited when these last pictures came back, and my kids were very excited too. I mean, it is a thrilling thing. What I love, though, is that when you said it's something to reach for.
Yeah.
I mean, we need that in this world. Although I wish it was more peace that we're reaching for.
Well, I mean, I agree. Listen, I remember, and you probably do too, when Sputnik went up.
Right.
And when the Soviets launched their first satellite, they beat us, and everybody thought this is the end of the world. There's something. And I remember standing outside watching. You could see it go by in the light of the moon. And that's when everybody learned to speak. I mean, when Russian was suddenly offered in high schools and all this. And yet, so it started out as a security thing. We were upset because it was a security. Someone else would control the skies. And then it became this again, something to reach for. It was heroic.
A frontier.
It's the stars. It's out
incredible.
There. Is there?
I get so excited when I can see a star in the city and the rings around the moon and everything else.
Is there a person who has not looked up at the night sky and said,
so.
"What's out there"?
Yeah.
How are we going to find out but this, you know?
So it was when you were explaining what happened when the ship exploded.
Right.
You said you worked the phones, you did this,
right.
you did that. There's a lot of work that goes on behind just getting on the camera and reporting the news.
Oh, yeah.
So if you were going to do, let's not talk about 2020, but if you were doing a piece on the 6:30 news, what time did you start working?
It depends. You could have been working on a piece for 3 weeks. 3 months, if it's a really big investigative thing, even longer, or you could have gotten the assignment that morning. And it really varies. And
could you pick your assignment? I mean,
sometimes.
Could you pick the investigative piece that you said, I want to do this, and you just do it?
It all depended. You could always, they want suggestions. They didn't approve everything. So you might get your story approved, you might not. Once you're set, let's say you get it that day, which is more and more the way things are happening.
And usually at what time?
Not a lot of forethought. Maybe at 9 or 10 in the morning, maybe 11.
Do you get a call or do you go to the office?
Both ways. Both ways. I'll give you one example. Do you remember when ABC was bought by Capital Cities? This was our first takeover. And I got a call at home that morning, very early, from our assignment desk saying they had gotten a tip that ABC was about to be merged with someone, and they didn't know who it was. But guess what, Lynn, it's your story. Fine. So I actually made a few calls. I had some sources, and I made some calls. And by the time I got into the office, I knew it was Cap Cities. It hadn't been announced yet. And the only thing we got at ABC, different from anybody else, is we got the first interview, which was, for the sake of argument, a half hour before the press conference with everybody else. So I spent all morning with a producer figuring out what footage we could pull in. So we had to do research on Cap Cities. We had to get, is there any pictures of what they do? Cap Cities at the time was a company that owned a number of television stations. So we had to get, pictures of a television, not exciting video at all. Yeah. And then we had to figure out what the economic implications, the financial implications were. And then I went and did the interview with the new guys. And they actually sent a satellite truck, and beamed it back to the office. So, and then we put it together for 6:30. So on that day, we had, but that's the way we all work. You're used to getting it done in a day. Local news, you could get the assignment. You could get one assignment at 10 o'clock, go out and shoot it, bring it back, and get a second assignment at 1:15, and go out and do that, and have a couple of stories.
And do you do your own writing?
I do, yes. Yeah.
Not all the television?
Most correspondents in the field do their own writing. Right. There are some prima donnas who come in and either don't know how to write very well or don't, and
And what happens when you're outside in front of a building? Do you have, and you've done a story and you've, I guess, written what you're going to say. Is the reporter reading it? On the prompter?
Not when when you're out in the field on
really
a breaking story,
it.
You're winging it. Yeah, yes. You are winging it. And usually you haven't written it. Usually if they say we're coming to you live, take the snowstorm.
Yeah.
Nobody had anything written down. They were just
Right.
Alas.
It's snowing.
It's snowing. It's snowing, and it was this high a few minutes ago, and now it's this high.
Higher, and we cover and cover and cover.
Yeah,
right.
a little bit too much.
Yeah.
But if you're on a story, you try to get your thoughts organized, and then with luck, you've had some communication with the anchor, so that when the anchor throws it to you, you know more or less what he or she is going to ask you. That was the wonderful, darling, fabulous Peter Jennings, my dear, dear friend, did have a habit of asking you exactly the opposite of what he told you he was going to ask you, and so you would go, no, Peter, that's not what I'm
Did he do that
for.
intentionally, or it just happened?
He claims he did some of it intentionally because he wanted to keep us on our toes.
Right.
He didn't want you to come back with a pat answer that you had rehearsed,
true.
Which is actually brilliant.
Yeah,
it's brilliant. But you wanted to wring his neck from time to time. But most of the time you're coordinated. And I mean, if I'm out, let's take a local news situation. I was just looking at the tapes, actually. I did a hostage situation out in Jamaica, Queens, one of these horrible things where somebody took someone hostage. And I was out there on the scene, and I knew they were going to come to me right away. And it was basically, you just fill in. While I'm standing here, it's still going on. X people are involved. We'll be back with the story in a few minutes. It's all about... Everything is all about communicating, telling the story.
Yes, and you have to know what you're talking about.
Know what you're talking about and relay the facts, and do it in as smooth a way as you can.
We've got 30 seconds, but I wanted to, when you talk to a politician, you don't understand what they're talking about. I mean...
I always say, what are you talking about?
Exactly.
I'm the one, there are no dumb questions. There are only dumb answers.
That's such a great lesson.
If somebody is watching and wants to be a reporter, that's the lesson. Never be afraid to ask a question. So what if you get embarrassed and someone says, it's not a dumb question.
Right, and if they haven't made you understand, then it's their fault.
Their fault, yeah.
Totally. Well, you've had a very exciting life. You're writing a book. I hope we're going to read more about this exciting
with luck,
life.
maybe you'll have me back on in the fall when it comes out. Yeah, I've done a memoir. It'll be out in the fall.
That's very
All
good.
these things and more.
Thank you, Lynn Sherr.
Thank you, Ronnie.
If there are any people you'd like to hear and topics you'd like us to explore, please let me know. You can write to me at CUNY TV, 365 Fifth Avenue, New York, New York, 10016, or you can go to the website at cuny.tv and click on Contact Us. I look forward to hearing from you.